People say, it's okay if I don't do anything. Someone else will take care of it for me. If there's a
Mhm.
disaster, I don't have to worry about it. My boss will take care of it, or those suits from Washington will handle it. President Biden will handle it, or the people with the badges and the smart uniforms will handle it for me. And I
Yeah.
tell them, you can't do that.
Hey, everyone. Welcome to another great podcast. I'm Melanie Johnson, your host today, and one of the owners of Elite Online Publishing, where we make your books #1 bestsellers. So today, I mean, we couldn't have had the more perfect person today be on our show. Our stuff is kind of evergreen, but there are fires that were ablazing in California, and we have a disaster expert. He's just been doing hits on Fox News today and all over the place in CNN just to talk about these disasters. But it's not just natural disasters, which a lot of us are having to face, but it's also personal disasters, disasters in business. I don't want to say the disaster that AI is going to bring, but it's going to bring massive change to many businesses. And if you're not ready, it could be a disaster. So, Patrick Hardy, welcome. Thanks for coming today and thanks for making the time since you are a hot commodity in demand today.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I'm looking forward to talking to people about it. Absolutely.
How did in the heck did you get involved in disasters? I mean, what was your journey to get to where you are?
Well, I was an EMS professional, so I worked as an EMT and then I was a medic. And I was at the same time, I was at college and I was studying political science. I was studying economics. I was
Wow.
studying all those things. And I graduated in 2005. And I said, you know what? I don't know what I want to do with all this. So I tried some things. I thought I didn't really like it.
Yeah.
And then we had a Hurricane Katrina in August of
Mhm.
2005. And I wrote a letter to the governor of Louisiana. You're going to think I'm making this up. I'm not making this up. I wrote a letter to the governor of Louisiana and I said, listen, I don't have any political connections. I'm sort of a nobody, but I graduated top of my class in college. I was a first responder and I would love to come down and work under you and the other emergency managers because this is clearly a seminal time. And whatever I can do, I'll work for whatever. I just want to get this wonderful experience. And they called me 2 days later and said, "We've never gotten a letter like this before, but here's what we're gonna do, and, you tell me if you think this was a good deal." They said, "All right, you can come down here. We'll give you a place to live. You'll live in the state police barracks." Okay, so that's about 100 yards from where you're gonna be working.
Yeah.
You'll get food at the cafeteria 3 times a day.
Uh-huh.
Sounds good. And you'll get $1,500, a whopping $1,500 a month. That's what you're gonna get. And we'll loan you a car to drive the entire time you're here because the cars you were driving were all the government cars. So everybody had their individual cars. And one of the people said, my boss said, why don't you
Yeah.
just take my car? Because I'm not using it. And so I was driving it around and they said, and then you agree to work 120 hours a week. How does that sound? And I said, I'm on the next plane because they said, basically, you'll get access to everybody. We'll let you in every meeting. You'll be in every briefing. You can do any
Yeah.
trainings you want. We'll allow you to do all those things. And I just said, yes, and for the next year, I had the most wonderful professional experience. My boss
Yeah.
actually, she's now retired. She's one of my closest, dearest friends in the world. Just people who were supportive and said, we've never met anybody that had that kind of initiative. And so that's how I really got started. And now I've been doing all these things in disaster management. It's been really fun. So it's just been a wonderful journey.
And, I tell people, I've told my sons who are in their 20s, you got paid. It was like you were getting paid to go to college, right? They paid you that 15, even though it might not have seemed like a lot, but they paid you,
Sure.
they gave you room and board to learn. You didn't have to pay them to learn, right?
That's right.
I mean, what an amazing experience and probably doors that opened and connections that you had through that whole thing that carried you through even today with that.
I did, and I met people. And I also like my payment was that I got a quote vacation time. I mean, they called it vacation, wasn't really. They just said you can take a week off, and I said I don't want to
Yeah.
go anywhere except to go on this training. Can I go to this elite training? Will you sign off on it? And I'll spend a week learning about agro terrorism or learning
Yeah.
about riot response or civil disturbances or whatever. And they would say yes, yes, yes. And I did all these wonderful trainings, and I met people even in those courses who I later ended up seeing in the field or people who I connected with
Yeah.
later in the corporate world. So it was just one of those great experiences that was just like, it's not something that you can, that you can do later in life. It's really hard to do. So early when you're free, you're not married, you have no kids, you just go out there and do it.
Do it. Go for it. Well, in Houston, we had a couple disasters this year, and I was in the mix of it. I had all these trees down, and I was leaving town when it first happened. I'm like, "Oh, great! I'm leaving in 2 days," and my yard has just exploded with a bunch of 10 trees that all fell down. And then we had another one in July, and I was out of town, and similar things happening. And you say, like, everyone says, "Well, just stay calm." Like, you gotta stay calm, but one of your things is never stay calm. Why would we never stay calm?
Because when you're trying to be calm, what you're trying to do is you are fighting the anxiety. You are fighting it. What I tell people
Mm,
is you are going to be anxious. You are going to be nervous. It's a disaster. You're going to be
mhm.
nervous. So why fight that? So what I took is I'm actually a black belt, and I remember this when I was young, as a young martial artist, that you try to redirect the energy. And so that's what I teach people to do now. I say redirect that nervousness into focus. Focus on what you're doing because, there's a lot of really good physiologic things that happen when you're anxious. A lot of things we don't like, but then there's some things we do like, right? We have, focused vision, our hearing is better. We're able to apply a lot more energy than maybe we otherwise would be able to. Let's not waste it by fighting it. Let's utilize it in a positive way where we're not in a state of panic, but where we're in a state of really focused, frenetic activity so we can get done what we need to do because there's a lot to do. And you understand that people have been in
Yeah.
disasters, hurricanes, earthquakes, lions and tigers and bears. Oh my, everyone knows things happen. Then there's a lot of things that have to get done very quickly. So let's use that anxiety. Let's use that
Yeah.
to a good purpose, not one where we're fighting it the entire way.
And then it's like, I remember having to really, like, execute a plan. Like, what am I gonna do, right? What do I do first? What do I do second? What do I do third? And how do you I mean, there's the plan ahead of time, which I don't know if that helps or not to make a plan if a disaster happens, but to and does it do you actually use that plan? And then is what is the how do you create the plan when you're in the mix of the whole thing? Like, you're saying focus, but then you gotta focus to, like, what am I supposed to do?
Perfect question. I hear it all the time, and I've been doing this with my clients for nearly 20 years. And that's what they always say to me. Oh, what do I do? Do I need to write a long, big disaster
Yeah.
plan with? Because I wrote because I'd tell you something. I worked as a consultant with Fortune 500 companies. Yep, they have 12,000-page disaster plans. My father was also a disaster planner. He was at the University of Southern California, the Cal State University system, Cal State Northridge, the Getty Museum, and his disaster plans were long. 500, 600, 700, 800 pages long. But you have a sprawling organization. So I tell people, forget about all that. You don't want to plan in advance? Forget all that. Here's what I want you to follow instead. And I'm
Yeah.
very unusual because everyone else says plan, plan, plan. I go, you know what? People may not plan. So you know what? Let's come up with a really good system. So this is what I tell my clients. I want you to use what's called the 5 pocket system. Okay. So
Ooh,
5 pockets. All
okay.
right. So these 5 pockets are the 5 pockets you need. It gives you all the resources you need to get to the next location. So we'll talk about what I mean by that. So 5 pockets are really 5 resources. Let's start with the physical, which is things like just basic stuff, having a mask, having a little bit of water. You don't need a huge amount. You don't need to empty out your cabinets. You don't have to have 50 water bottles. Then, if you're a diabetic, you want to have your insulin, things like that. Then you look at the psychological. And this is what I tell people all the time. I say, always have something with you that'll comfort you when you need it the most, when there's just a lot going on and you just need to center. Find something,
Mhm.
a book. I actually tell those to teenagers all the time. You and I were talking about this before we started recording, which is you have a couple sons, and I say, you know what? I advise young people to do? If you like Nintendo Switch, then you know what? The Nintendo Switch is in your disaster kit. You know why? Because every once in a while, I want you to escape from this nonsense. I want you to
Yeah.
forget the world. Then, so once you talk to physical and the psychological, then talk about personal. So things like you're wearing glasses, for example. I would tell someone with glasses, always have a back.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? Always have, we have to have clothing, right? We have to have our car keys, keys like that. I also tell
Yeah.
them if you're evacuating somewhere to grandma's house, have a key to grandma's house because grandma may not be home. I mean, my grandma is actually, she's 90 years old and she's a competitive bridge player. So do I have a key to her house? Yes, I do. And she knows I would only use it. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean,
Show up at any time.
right, exactly. So you have the preparation, and then I tell people have your phone. So that's the fourth is your phone, and the last one is your
Yeah.
papers. So always, always, always have a government identification document on you. And also for those you are taking care of, children, the elderly, if you're a
Mhm.
caregiver, whatever. So those are the 5 things you need to have. And sometimes people say, well, do I need to have this huge amount of stuff? I say, no, all you need to have on you in those 5 pockets is just enough to get to the next location where you're evacuating, sheltering in place, or locking down. So, for example, this very moment, I'm in a studio here in Sacramento. I'm at a studio where I record in all the time. And if something were to happen here, I have just enough on me in this. I actually have a sling. It's a little far an arm's length away. That's just enough to get to my car. And in my car, I have a kit just enough to get to a hotel or get to my parents' house. You know what I
Mm,
mean? And then once I'm there, right, then I have access to more because those are the 5 things. So don't worry about trying to figure out a trillion things right now. Don't worry about insurance right now. Just focus
yeah.
on yourself. And once you get yourself taken care of with your 5 pockets, now you can work on the 5 pockets for your pets, for the other people in your life, your children,
Mm,
your caregiver, and that's how it does it because then you're always in a situation where you're not under preparing and you're not over preparing. That's why I tell people focus on those 5 things and you're going to be in a great position in any disaster. And by the way, you didn't need a huge binder or 12,000 pages to do it.
yeah. And there were so many people in California that didn't have their wallet even. They didn't, think about that, and I felt bad for this one family in the fire. Their fireproof safe melted,
Yeah.
and all the jewelry they had was melted. I was thinking, "Gosh, I guess you should have, like, a go-to bag for like, instead of having a bunch of like, if you needed to grab that, you could grab it, but sometimes you don't even have time to do that." Like you say, just keep it simple of what's the most meaningful that you can get from one thing to the other. You talk about what's the C3 method? Is that different than the 5 pockets?
Yeah, it is. But it's something that I talk about when I discuss the C3 method. What I tell people is I say, before we worry about what we're taking, before we worry about where we're going, one of the problems that I've noticed that people do, and this happens in companies all the time, and we'll talk about that in a little
Mhm,
bit, I'm sure, is that people say, it's okay if I don't do anything. Someone else will take care of it for me. If there's a
mhm.
disaster, I don't have to worry about it. My boss will take care of it, or those suits from Washington will handle it. President Biden will handle it, or the people with the badges and the smart uniforms will handle it for me. And I
Yeah,
tell them, you can't do that. And I do this with companies all the time. I turn to them and I'll literally play this game with them all the time. Okay, so I'll have a disaster plan and they'll hire me to say train people, and I'll say, okay, fine.
yeah,
So I'll train everybody, and so we'll run a quick training, and I got the employees and the managers in the room. Then we run a quick drill. And this is where it gets really fun because I'll say, if we have a disaster, anyone needs to be able to take command. And by that's for the first plank
yeah,
of the C3 method is taking command. And I say, everybody, if there's a disaster, who would be in charge? And they always point to the manager or the CEO. They always go, oh, that person will handle it or that person will do it all. I go, she's in Barbados. Next. Oh, so and so. He's on jury duty. Next. So and so. He's injured in the disaster. Next. And I just keep doing that until they
yeah.
realize it's them. They have to be in
Mm,
charge. They have to do that. And so I look at them and I say, I don't even have to pick up this disaster plan without, I can audit it without even opening it because I can tell you right now, if employees do not feel empowered to take
mhm,
command, to be able to lead and realize I'm responsible for this disaster response, this was a waste of time. That plan was a waste of
mhm,
time. So that's the first step. The second step is communication. And when I talk about communication, I talk about developing teams. And especially in corporate
mhm.
situations, I literally will actually do this. I'll walk in a room, we'll run a drill, and I'll say, who's been here the least amount of time? Who knows this place the least? Who has no idea what's going on here? And inevitably, this happens all the time. I'll get this. People are avoiding my gaze all the time. They don't want to know. They go, Yeah, you avoiding my gaze? And they'll be afraid. And I said, this is not a magic act. Don't worry, I'm not making anybody's arms disappear. I'm
Yeah,
not sawing you in half. I'm not pulling rabbits out of your ears or whatever. And so I'll put them in front and I'll hand them the disaster plan. I'll say, today you're in charge. And that freaks out everybody in the room because I say, no, 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 we're not gonna get overwhelmed. We're gonna take command of the situation. It's on you. We get that.
yeah.
Now, how are we going to create a team around you? You can be empowered with a team around you. Even if you don't have this silly binder, who cares? Then just create a team. And that's why the culture is so important. That culture is so important.
Mm,
Because then the carry out is the easy one. Just get it done.
yeah,
Start doing stuff. I tell people there's no wrong. Whenever there's a disaster, there are no good decisions left. All the good decisions are gone. So don't worry about making a good decision. You're either going to make bad decision number one or bad decision number two. And it's perfectly fine because it's not your fault, nobody's fault.
yeah.
It's the situation. So all we can do is do our very, very best. And I find that really empowers people. It brings people
Yeah.
to the front, so it helps them to understand that. So that's why the C3 method is so critical, and I do this with families too. It's your disaster, not FEMA's, not the fire department's, not President Biden or Trump or whatever. It's you.
Yeah. And how do you recover from it? This is what I find like in our neighborhood, a lot of my neighbors were in shock and just it took them months to get through and, it was back to back. So then it was like I remember just by so that was July, by December they were finally saying I finally start feeling like I'm back to normal now a little bit. So I imagine it is a shock. How do we do the mental recovery after we've gone through the actual disaster part?
What I tell people is the first thing I want you to do is grieve. That is the very first thing I want you to do. Don't do anything else. Don't call your insurance agent. Don't don't
Mhm.
don't do anything else. I want you to sit there. I want
Yep.
you to be quiet with everyone, and I want you to hug each other, and I want you to grieve for a
Mhm.
minute. Think about everything that was lost and get that out. Because you know what I find? They try to say, let's suck it up and do that. And it's just, that doesn't work with people. When I talk, I actually train mental health professionals. And I say
Mhm.
to work in disasters, I go to graduate schools around the country and I do it. I lecture to them. And I was at the University of Alabama and I was talking to people who are going to be psychologists. And I said, in a disaster, the first thing you need to do is let these people grieve, whatever that is. Whether it's crying,
Yeah.
whether it's holding a teddy bear, whatever it is, let them do that. Now, once we've grieved, now we say, how are we going to make this better? How are we going to get ourselves in a better position? And then that starts to show things differently in people saying, what have we lost? Now, what are we going to be
Yeah.
able to gain? How are we going to make ourselves stronger? And that's when I find that's true resiliency, is when people see the
Yeah.
strength, not the weakness.
Let's shift over to the companies a little bit. I love all that advice. That was really good to find the strength and to grieve. I think we don't allow ourselves that time to grieve that often, like we're in motion. So I love all that advice. So AI is coming, whether we like it or not. It's already here. And I keep telling our team, like, we're not going to be blockbuster. We're not going to be, we've got to stay up and be innovative and embrace it. And if you don't, you're already behind. How do you feel about that? What are you saying to your corporate clients about the disaster or non-disaster? It's like the industrial revolution and the internet revolution that's coming.
Treat it like a hurricane. Treat it exactly like a hurricane. It's coming. So when it happens, so what do we need to do? Do we need to appoint somebody to be in charge of this AI disaster? Maybe yes. And I literally have companies where I've appointed them. I mean,
Yeah.
you have to realize I come from a political science background. That was one of my majors in college. So we say, I'll appoint a czar. Okay, so someone here is going to be the AI czar. And I actually did this with a Silicon
Right.
Valley company recently that weirdly enough was kind of behind in generative AI. They were working on trying to
Hmm.
integrate it, but they actually were trying to figure it out because it disrupted a major part of their business. And so I said, we're going to find somebody who can, first of all, put us in a position where we have someone who's in charge of that. Now that we've done that, now let's just act the same steps that we would with anything else. Because the second decision we all have to make is, do we evacuate, shelter in place, or lockdown? And people go, how does that apply to
What?
AI? And I
What
said,
is evacuate?
evacuate. And I say, evacuate means we all go home and we forget about this and we just decide we're going to, sheltering in place means we're all staying here and we're going to work together and figure it out. That's what's going to happen, right? Or we're going to lock ourselves down and just keep our blinders on, right? So no matter what it is, I tell people in that instance, I said, basically, you're doing a shelter in place. We're going to stay here. We're going to keep a room. We're going to work it
Yeah.
through until we've incorporated it into the culture, right? Because now we
Mhm.
have to assess it. We're not going to overreact. We're not going to chicken little. I know that the news likes to say, these organizations are going to go bust and all that. Don't believe any of that. I've been in this 20 years. They say that stuff
Yeah.
and then it ends up being not true. So I say we're going to sit and we're going to, again, not panic. We're going to focus ourselves and take that frenetic energy and learn more about AI and how can we incorporate AI into our business? Or is it such a threat to our business that we have to do something else? So, because when people evacuate in hurricanes, I say the same thing. I say, is it a disruption to your life? If it is enough of a
Mhm.
disruption, what is it? What opportunities is it offering you? Because I've had people before who just said, I can't come home. I'm not going to go back. And we say, okay,
Yeah.
fine. Then I'm going to plan for you to move somewhere else. The hurricane was just an opportunity for you to say, I'm done with South Florida. Okay,
Mhm.
no problem. And so, but AI is the same way. But we have to approach it from a different perspective because I tell people, look at it from a disruption perspective. Don't look at how big
Mhm.
it is or the theory or the metaphorical dark clouds. Look at it
Yeah,
as how does this put us in a position to be successful in the future? Because these are just tools. This is anything else.
right.
Right? They're just tools, and we just have to figure out how to utilize them properly, and when we do that, that's when I find the disruption is in our advantage now. How do we put it to our advantage to turn that from something that is supposed to make us weaker into something that's gonna make us tremendously stronger?
We've been embracing AR in our company for quite a few years now, like, the little bits of it as we've gone, and then we go to the next generation of tools. And one of the mentors that we listen to, Mike Koenigs, he talks about having like an AI czar. You should have someone appointed in your company that needs to do that, is on top of the technology and using it all the time. And about the disruption, I think you could say, well, you can either embrace it or ignore it. But if you ignore it, and then eventually you have to embrace it, you're gonna be so far behind. It's gonna be harder to embrace it, I think. I tell this story, I was about 6, 7 years ago. I needed a new car, and my son was telling me, You should get a Tesla." And I'm like, "A Tesla? I don't want a Tesla. I need a mommy car. I'm still in mommy mode." "No, mom, you need to test drive a Tesla." "Alright, tell me, why do I need a Tesla?" And he said, "Well, because 'cause you're getting older, and then it's gonna be harder for you to learn the technology. It's easier if you start learning the technology now, and then you'll be further ahead down the road when it's even more advanced." And that was partly true, right? If you get it in the beginning and you're starting to train yourself, it's not as hard, it's not as big of a disruption. Are you trying to tell your clients to, like, start sooner as opposed to later?
I do. I do. I tell them as soon as possible. I say, even if you're a small business, appoint somebody who can focus on that and can put you in a position to be successful right away. That's the first thing I say is
Yeah,
how can we do that to make it so that you can use that tool and it's something stronger because anyone can learn a Tesla. I have people who are elderly who just love their Teslas. There's a lot of technology, but you're right. Younger people tend to like to embrace it. And you know why they do better with it? Because they don't so much about it. They don't
right.
see technology as a threat. They're excited by it. I mean,
Mhm.
I actually did a disaster fund for a big video game company, and it was amazing how the creatives there would actually embrace the technology and say, "Is it a threat to the way we currently create games? Yep. Is there a better way we can do it? Absolutely. And you know what? AI is the option. AI is the
Yeah.
option for us to be able to do it. So it's a great tool, something that we can definitely incorporate. So it's a wonderful thing. But just like you said, the way you approached it is exactly right. That's how you have to do it.
Yeah, you gotta dive in sooner as opposed to later. Well, thanks for coming today and spending time with us with all the disasters going
Thank you.
on. Really, really appreciate it. Tell people where they can reach out to you, Patrick.
If you want to find me, I'm on disasterpatrick.com. I'm a keynote speaker. I have a great YouTube page. I take on the most difficult disaster challenges in the world. I just I'm doing a lot of incredible things. I have a book. So there's so many things on there. Feel free to engage me on there or engage me on social media. I would love to be able to hear from you.
Yep, grab his book. It's on Amazon and it's Design Any Disaster is the name of it. We'll put all that in the show notes so you have it. And remember, if you're looking to write your own book at Elite Online Publishing, we help all our authors to become #1 bestsellers. We'll see you next time. Have a great week, everybody. Bye bye. Hey, are you looking to increase your revenue, build credibility, and elevate your brand? This podcast is brought to you by Elite Online Publishing, an innovative publishing and full spectrum marketing company. They will publish and market your book to make it a #1 bestseller. Becoming an author is the best way to market your business. So contact them at eliteonlinepublishing.com today. All of their authors become #1 bestsellers.